Did you recently graduate or are you about to graduate and you want to work in the space sector? Well, you're in luck because that's what I do is I help people to work in the space industry. I'm Laura. I'm a space career coach. I've worked in the space sector for 20 years. I remember when I was a student, I had no real clear understanding of how it was I could transfer my academic skill set and credentials to a space career. So I want to go over some of these specific things that I recommend you do after you graduate and hopefully even before you graduate. Number one thing I think you should start with while you're still a student is taking advantage of career services. Chances are the people at career services, as talented as they are not going to be able to help you with the specifics of a space career simply because that is very niche. Even if you are attending a university that is well known for having space research or some kind of space connection, it can still be very challenging for the people who work in career services to help you with space. That's why I exist, by the way. So if you do have specific space questions, feel free to reach out to me. But what they can do at career services is go over some basics with you for free. And that is valuable because if you're looking ahead to after you graduate, there might not be a way for you to have those services for free. You might need to pay someone, a career coach or resume reviewer, somebody like that, who can help you figure out what should be in your resume, how to clearly articulate what you're looking for, how to properly apply for jobs. This is something I did not do until later in my academic career. When I was an undergrad, I didn't think to do this. It wasn't until I was in graduate school that I really took advantage of someone looking over my resume and teaching me how to put together a resume. And of course, there's all kinds of free resources online. Some of them are not very good. In fact, I'd say a lot of them are not very good. Some of them definitely have some red flags. I even have a self-paced mini course for how to put together a space-specific resume and cover letter. The link is down in the description below if you want to check that out. Now, what I want you to do from there is really understand what it is that you want. And this is something I feel like a lot of students just don't have a good grasp on. I know I didn't when I was a student. I wanted to work in space, and then I really didn't know exactly what that meant. And so if you have internships in the past, you might have a clear idea. If you worked on a research project, you might have a clear idea. Generally, people who are students or recent graduates, they just are not totally clear on what they're looking for, which is absolutely fine. And in fact, it's very, very normal. But it does make it more difficult for you to explain what it is you want to do when someone asks you, what do you want to do? And you need to have a really good answer for that. My answer when I was a young professional was, I want to work in space. I want to do anything. I'll do anything in space. That is a terrible answer. It might be honest, but it's a terrible answer. I'm going to link above a video that I put together a while ago on what to do if you have too many space interests, how to narrow it down. But that is something I highly recommend that you take some time to do, because the more clearly you can understand what you're looking for and explain it to yourself, have that internal messaging, the better you're going to be able to explain it to other people. And that could be other people who are helping you network, professors, or even in a job interview. They want to know why you want to work there. And you need to be able to explain, well, I don't just want any job in space. That's not a good answer. Don't ever say that in an interview, right? You don't ever say, I want this job because I want to work in space. You say, I want this job because this part of this job is very important to me and what I want to do in my career and the kind of things that I want to contribute towards. Like, you need to be very specific. And in order to be specific, you need to understand what it is that you are looking for. One way to help with this is to think ahead 10 years, 20 years, the end of your career. The space sector is going to look completely different at the end of your career. I guarantee it. It's even going to look different a decade from now. But what do you want to have helped accomplish? What legacy do you want to leave? I know you're very young and I'm talking to you about legacy, right? But it's important for you to try to picture that end goal or the underlying mission behind your end goal, because it's very different for each person. And for you, that underlying goal, that motivator, is going to help differentiate you, and it's going to help you figure out why you want to work in a specific company or a specific type of job, what that looks like for you, and help you narrow it down a bit. So all of this is going to help you go from every space job out there to something that you can explain why you want to do. And it might not be super narrow. You might still have like some like really kind of vague idea. I want to be an aerospace engineer on rockets. I mean, that's fine. You know, you don't necessarily need to get more specific on that, but if you can get more specific than that, that would be ideal. Because then you're not just a recent graduate who with an aerospace engineering degree or any other degree. You do not need to be an aerospace aerospace engineer to work in space. Hear me out here. You do not need to be an engineer to work in space. I'm just using that as an example. And so you don't want to be the, millionth aerospace engineer who just graduated from college who is applying for this job. You want to stand out. And the way you stand out is by saying, I want to contribute to sending humans to Mars, and therefore I want to work on landing system of Starship. I'm making this stuff up, by the way, but there's a lot of people who go for SpaceX, and so it's a pretty good example. If you're watching this video, you might have some desire to work for SpaceX or no desire to work for SpaceX. But either way, if you are someone who is applying for a job where there are a lot of other candidates, such as SpaceX, then you are going to want to stand out. And the way that you do that is being very clear about what it is that you want to contribute towards and what kind of job that is. Now, you might not get that job, right? You might not get that ideal job as your first job. You'd be very lucky to. Most people don't. In fact, most people early in their careers, they sort of zigzag. They try one thing, they try something else. And that might be what you've done with internships, for example. It's very common. You don't necessarily care that you get an internship here at NASA or wherever else. You just care that you got the internship. And that's fine, because that helps you determine what you like and what you don't like. And it gets you that work experience, and it gets you those networking connections. If you do want to work at NASA, by the way, most people, when they think about the options in the space sector, they think about SpaceX and they think about NASA, but there's so much more out there. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at the end of the video because it's almost a separate category. So I'll get into that later. So now you have maybe a clear idea of what you want to do next, or at least a clear idea of what direction you want to go in, and not necessarily the exact steps. And that's okay if you don't. I'd be very surprised if you knew the exact steps that you'd want to go. You'd be quite the exception. You really just want to have a more narrow path in front of you, so it's not all the paths in front of you. And from there, I want you to do this dual path of applying for open jobs, but networking. And networking is not something I was really taught how to do when I was a student. I was told it was important. I was told that I should do it. No one really taught me how. It's one of these things that I think people just, they pick up. They don't necessarily get formal training on. They just kind of pick it up, and some people are good at it and some people are not good at it, and some people are intimidated. A lot of people are intimidated by it, and a lot of people just, it comes naturally to them. What I want you to do is not feel like it's a big deal. You've had conversations about space probably throughout your life, or at least for quite a number of years now. Or actually maybe not. Maybe space is new to you. Maybe you have some other degree and you're realizing you can apply that degree in space, because trust me, any degree can be applied in space. So let's just say that you have a communications degree and you're realizing you want to do space communications, like you want to do communications for a space company or NASA or someone else, which is very much a needed job. There's communications, there's marketing, there's all kinds of things. So whether or not you've had vast experience talking about space, you've at least talked about your career interests and the kind of professional things that interest you, right? Whether it's communications or marketing or whatever else. And so think of it that way, is that you have people that you've spoken to, that you've started to build relationships with professionally, that know your interests. And that's what networking is. It's you being able to form professional relationships with other people, and those people can introduce you to other people or to opportunities. And by the way, it's not entirely a give thing. If you're thinking about networking the wrong way, I encourage you to think about it as a give and take. You benefit them, they benefit you. It's a relationship. It's going to be mutually beneficial. If you are finding this content useful, if you are a job seeker who wants to work in space, I would be over the moon if you subscribe. Thank you. So what I want you to do is think about those types of companies or organizations you want to work for and start reaching out to people. And if you're intimidated by the thought of reaching out to strangers, then reach out to the people you already know and see if they can introduce you. And that way you can start to build your professional network, which is vital. As you're applying for jobs, it is so helpful for you to have a champion on the inside, a formal referral, even someone who can give you the inside scoop as to what that job posting is actually looking for. Or perhaps even you are in communication with the hiring manager or in communication with the CEO or someone with influence who can really put you in that spot that you're applying for. Don't discount networking as a very powerful tool for getting work in the space industry. I was told when I was a student that the people that I'd be doing internships with and my classmates and other people who I'd meet who come to give lectures or who I meet in other ways, that they would be invaluable throughout my career. And I have found that to be true and false. I have found that there have definitely been people who I met 20 years ago at the start of my career when I was still a student, who I still am in contact with today. But most of them have left the industry for some reason or another, especially the students. Really valuable connections in the short term are people who are connected to the space industry. So not necessarily your professors, but people your professors know, who are not professors themselves most likely, people in the industry, which I didn't find out until I was at graduate school and my graduate advisor was connected to people in industry. And so he was able to introduce me to people in this emerging space sector that I knew almost nothing about. And that was so valuable that it helped me get my first full-time job. I actually have a whole video on that, which I will link above as well. As you are applying for jobs and networking, I want you to really focus on the jobs that you truly want. Some people think that they should be applying for hundreds of jobs. And in fact, I get messages from students or from students' parents saying that they have applied to hundreds of jobs and gotten very few interviews or gotten no offers. That's the wrong way to do it. It is quality over quantity that I want you to really focus on. If you are applying to hundreds of jobs, you are applying to any open position, and it's almost a throwaway resume, right? It's probably the same resume for every single application. If you're putting a cover letter at all, it's probably the same cover letter for every application, and that is just the wrong way to do it. Instead, you should be tailoring your resume and cover letter, and including a cover letter, for every single job you apply for. Every single job you apply for should take you time. I know that places like LinkedIn have a little button and all you do is press that button and it submits your application. I don't really recommend you do that because your application is so much more powerful and is so much more likely to get a response if you take the time to tailor it to that specific company or organization, to that specific job. And even if you can talk to people within that team, because the job posting might be different from what the team or the hiring manager actually is looking for. Which is why networking is so important. Because if you're talking to people who are in that team or you're talking to the hiring manager, they can tell you things that are not necessarily in that job posting. That job posting might not even be written by the people who are doing the hiring. So it's super, super important that you take that time to not only tailor your application to what that job posting actually says, like point by point. And by the way, you don't need to meet every single point. You really don't. It's a wish list. But even if you meet just a few of those, making sure your application is highlighting those things that you actually have that are pointed out in the job posting, and then anything else that you might hear from your networking contacts about that job, then making sure that you put that in there too, that you emphasize that and delete the irrelevant information. I don't recommend that you put out a general resume for every single job because there's going to be so much irrelevant information. It is going to crowd out the relevant information. Now, I know that you are young and you probably don't have a ton of information on your resume, so you probably don't have a ton of experience. So you're probably thinking, what are you talking about? What's going to crowd it out? I barely have anything in my resume. And that is important for you to realize that you want to highlight what is most relevant. Therefore, even if you have not much experience, you can really emphasize the experience that you have that is relevant to the job. It could be a project that you've done, an internship that you've had. It could be even just coursework, even just, a homework assignment that was super relevant. If you're, calculating some technical thing having exactly to do with that job and you remember you did that and you remember you got that assignment correct, and it really isn't wrong to even just highlight that if you've got no other experience, because that shows that you have at least a teeny bit of experience that you can showcase on your resume to someone who cares about that experience. But if you're putting everything out there, if you're putting, this thing and that thing and all these other things that the hiring manager or the hiring panel does not care about, or even just the initial scanner, the recruiter or the HR person who's initially scanning it after the algorithm, they might see just a bunch of clutter and they might not see what they're looking for. So it's really up to you to highlight the information that is most relevant, even if you don't have a lot of experience yet. The ideal situation is if you have worked in an internship and you loved it and you already have contacts there and they already know how well you work. And that way you can transition from being an intern or a co-op or some other arrangement into a full-time job. That is ideal if that is something that you want to do. Don't feel obligated to continue working in a position just because you've worked there before. It's great if you have that, and it could buy you time if you have no other job prospects, but don't continue doing something just because it's in front of you and available, because what that's going to do is it's going to start to specialize you. So if you are working a job that you don't particularly want to continue on in the future, you're just doing it because it's a job available to you right now, you might need the paycheck. And so that's absolutely fine. Stay there if you need that paycheck, but don't stay there too long. Because what that's going to do is it's going to pigeonhole you. Other people are going to look at your resume. They're going to see that you have 2, 3, 4 years working this type of job. They're going to assume that that's the kind of job that you should be looking for next. And instead, if that's not the kind of work you want to keep doing, you should actually be trying to position yourself to move on to the thing you actually want to do. If you don't want to keep on doing that thing that you've been doing, then you should not be looking for that same job, that safe job, for the next job. You should be strategically planning, holding on to that paycheck if you need that paycheck, but then strategically planning for what you're going to do next, that stepping stone to get to where you actually want to go. I remember back when I was a master's student, I was working on essentially astronomy data processing and coding, and I hated it. I loved the concept of the project, but I hated coding. And so while that's what I was doing, and that's what I had been doing for a few years, that was not what I wanted to do next. And so I had that very difficult choice at the time, or to give up a NASA grant and to transition to something closer to what I truly wanted to be doing. I never wanted to program again, and since that graduate role, I have never programmed again. You might be the opposite. You might love programming, and if you do, you have a really good chance of getting a job because there's a very much need for that kind of thing. But my example is that you shouldn't keep on going with something just because you have that experience already, because then people are going to see you as a specialist in that after a certain point. You've got the resume. You've got your networking contacts. What should you be doing now? You should be focusing as much time as possible reaching out to new contacts, especially contacts who are working in the particular area of space that you want to work for, or the particular company or team that you want to work for. And get as specific as you can. You can't just say, I want to work at NASA. You have to say, I want to work at this specific office at NASA, this specific team, this specific mission. For larger organizations, it's just too big. You really do need to figure out how to narrow it down. And most likely, you're going to need to talk to people in order to figure out how to narrow it down, to figure out what team you actually want to be working for. A large prime contractor, for example. Prime contractors are like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. Like these companies that are really big contractors, they are so big that they are always hiring. But are they hiring for space, or are they hiring for something else? Are they hiring for the area of space that you want to work on, or are they hiring for an area of space that you don't want to work on? Because a lot of these are defense contractors. Maybe you want to work in defense, maybe you want to stay in civil space. So talking to people and doing your research to figure out what area of the company or organization you want to work for can really be helpful. If you know nobody who works there, that's where you can continue on to network. Have those introductions by the people you already know, but then see if you can be brave enough to reach out to people you don't know. And this is really intimidating for a lot of people. Cold messaging. Think of it this way, is the worst thing they can do is not answer you. Now, I do have an entire video on how to properly network on LinkedIn, because most people do not properly network on LinkedIn, and most people just send out copy and paste messages to 100 people on LinkedIn and they hope they get a response. That's not the right way to do it. That's a really bad way to do it. So watch the video I linked above about how to properly network on LinkedIn. Make it about them and not about you, because it's almost like your information gathering. If you want to know what it's really like to go work at headquarters at NASA, then you need to go ahead and talk to people at headquarters at NASA and ask them questions about themselves and their work, and not talk about you. They're going to naturally want to know about you because you're building a relationship. But the whole point is for you to learn about them and what they're doing, and have that conversation and have that relationship, rather than make it about you and you wanting a job. If all of this is sounding like too much for you to do, too much to handle, too much information, I actually break this down in a process I've created working with over 100 clients who want to work in the space industry. It's called Launch Your Space Career. It's an entirely online, self-paced course that you can go through step by step by step. There's video modules, there's a workbook, there's exercises, so that you can learn in more detail how to transition to the space industry, how to get a job in the space industry and launch your space career. I also do live coaching. So contact me if you're interested in doing live coaching one-on-one or in a group with me. Now, I have been mentioning NASA quite a bit. I do not recommend applying for a job as a NASA civil servant that's a non-contractor position if you have just graduated, unless you have all the patience of the world, because it can take many months, even up to a year, to get a federal job. NASA gets a lot of applications and they tend to process them very slowly. So if you want to work at NASA as a civil servant, which is open to U.S. citizens, then you really should be starting the process many, many, many months before you graduate. But most of the people working at NASA centers are not NASA civil servants. They are, in fact, contractors, people who work at those prime contractors, but also smaller startups, companies that you may or may not have ever heard of. Some companies are slower than others. Some companies hire pretty rapidly, and some of them it really does take months. And so you do need to have that patience. Patience is something I really want you to have. It can take months. It usually takes months to be hired. There are people who are very lucky and who get hired within weeks, within a month. That's so rare. That is really rare. I have been working with over 100 coaching clients at this point, and I can tell you that it usually takes many months to get hired. If you are watching this and you're graduating fairly soon, within the next few months, please start this process now. If you have already graduated, please understand that it's going to take you a little bit of time. So you might need to get family help, or you might need to live off your savings, or you might need to get some kind of part-time job or full-time job doing something else to have that paycheck in order for you to then apply for what you really want to do in your career. Remember that a resume is a marketing document and not a listing of your entire work history. If you need to do something that is not space related for a job right now that you don't necessarily want to put on your resume, then don't put it on your resume. It's nobody's business how you're making a living right now. There are, of course, exceptions. If there is an online application that requires you to put every single job that you've ever worked, or at least every single job that you've ever worked recently, then of course you need to list it. But on your resume or your LinkedIn, they are places where you can steer the person's thinking, the reader's thinking, into the direction that you want. So if your background, a lot of my background when I was a student, I was a babysitter. My first official job was childcare at a YMCA. I sold shoes at a department store. I tutored. I don't believe I ever put those things on any kind of professional resume. At least I hope I didn't, but they don't belong on a professional resume unless, of course, I wanted a job in retail or in childcare or something like that. For a space-related job, stick with the types of jobs that you have worked that are related to the career that you want. And it could be that you are working or have worked a job that is related to the career you want, just not space related. It's very common for clients to come to me. They have engineering experience in another industry, or they have, communications experience or some other professional experience in a non-space industry. And that is relevant to the job that you want, because you can say, I may not have worked in space since I graduated, but I have done these related tasks at my current job or another job I had that are directly relevant to the job I'm applying for in the space sector. So just strategically think about what you want the reader to know about you. They don't need to know about everything that you've ever worked. They need to know about the skill set that you think is most relevant for the job that you're applying for in the space industry. I promised you I'd talk more about NASA jobs. NASA jobs are a whole other beast. USAjobs.gov is where you want to go if you are a U.S. citizen. And that is a very formal process. That is an involved process. It will take you time. They are going to take their time getting back to you. But if your dream is to work at NASA, you don't necessarily need to be that NASA civil servant. So watch this next video about how to work at NASA without being a civil servant. You don't even need to be a U.S. citizen in some cases. Check out this video next. Thank you.